absolutely wonderful when people are working together harmoniously and paying attention to God's will, and they bring everything together to accomplish God's perfect plan. But there are some times when that just doesn't happen. And this week, our story is Genesis 27, 1 through 32. I encourage you to go and read that yourself. But it's the story of Esau and Jacob. And what we see this week is that no one is paying any attention to God's will. And they don't really have the trust and the faith that they need. So what's at stake here is both a birthright and a blessing. Esau, as the oldest twin, should be getting a birthright and a blessing. The birthright you can think of as the monetary element, the inheritance, in other words. And so in the ancient world, the inheritance was divided into parts. So if you had 6 children, it was divided into 7 parts, and the oldest would get 2, everyone else would get 1. If you had 12 children, it would be divided into 13 parts. The oldest would get 2, everyone else would get 1. In this instance, there's only 2 boys, they're twins, and so it's divided 3 ways. Esau stands to gain twice as much as his brother. So you can see if you have a fewer number of children in the family, there's going to be a greater disparity. So there's that. And Esau's already forfeited that. That was a previous lesson, and what we saw was that Esau sold his birthright to his brother Jacob in exchange for a bowl of lentil soup. Hard to believe, but true. All right, so the second thing that's at stake here, and this is what's happening in our story, is the blessing. And the blessing is the acknowledgement by the patriarch of the family that the person receiving the blessing is now going to be the representative of the family in their relationship with God. It's all about being the covenant keeper. So we saw that Abraham passed that on to Isaac, and now Isaac should be passing it on to Esau, but because of the deception, it is passed on to Jacob. So that's what's happening in this story. The birthright has already been forfeited. All right, so where do we begin with the problems here? Well, we first of all have a problem with the parents. The parents set the situation up long before. We are told that Isaac had his favorite, which was Esau, who was rough, outdoorsy, a hunt fish kind of guy. And Rebecca had her favorite, which was Jacob. Jacob was gentle, quiet, more like the kind who would go out and say, I'm going to make a gourmet lentil soup tonight. They shouldn't have had favorites. Parents should never have favorites. They should never play favorites. And they should never idolize a child. Now, it's perfectly fine to give a child a lot of love and attention and affection. But if you're compromising virtue, if you're compromising and lying in order to advance that child, then you've idolized that child. And that is a major problem. We don't want that to be happening. Each child is a gift from God, and these parents need to remember that. They haven't. And that's a problem. Because when we put one child over another, the one who is at the bottom feels depression and anger. The one who's at the top ends up feeling guilty and becomes cowardly. We'll talk about that later. And there's long-term damage and chaos and hurt that goes on in the family that can last generations. That's what's happening here. The parents started it. Jacob is also at fault here. He's no child. He's a grown man. Esau's married and has wives. Jacob should be probably too. And he wonders about the ethics of this plan that Rebecca has thrown out there. But he decides that he's going to go along with it. Greed wins. And so he's very deliberate in the way that he goes about undertaking this ruse to fool his father. And so he supersedes his brother in the worst possible way. And he's fully aware of what he's doing. And you know that because he runs afterwards. And then later on, what we'll see next week is when he meets his brother again, he's very fearful. And that indicates to me that he is someone who knows that he has done wrong and needs to fix it. All right, so then we have Esau. You might be feeling sorry for him, but you probably shouldn't, because we're informed that he was sort of ungrateful of his position. We are told that he despised his birthright and sold it for a lentil stew. He's a little self-centered. He's in the moment. He wants what he wants it right away, and he wants to get it. He is not taking his role as the spiritual leader very seriously. And one of the reasons we know this is because he did not take care in who he married. He married 2 Hittite women and later Edomite women. And we know, of course, that that isn't wise because they worship pagan gods. And as the spiritual leader, he needs to find a wife who will continue the covenant with him. And so Esau is a little bit guilty here because he's impatient, he's reckless, he's impulsive, and he probably doesn't really actually deserve the blessing. I'm not saying that Jacob does, but Esau definitely doesn't. Now let's talk about the will of God. The will of God is important here, but no one seems to care. No one has faith and trust. The truth is that when these 2 children were in Rebekah's womb, God said to her, Esau will usurp Jacob. Jacob will usurp Esau. And that's in the back of Rebekah's mind. And we know that, but it doesn't excuse her, because what she should have done is trusted and waited for God to do this in the right way in his own time. And what she could have been doing is showing Esau how much she cared about him, knowing that he would be usurped by his younger brother and that would probably be painful. She should have been caring for both of these boys, knowing that God's hand would work at some point. Jacob here goes along with very little coaxing. He is certainly not attuned to God's will either. And then we have Isaac, the father. There has been plenty of times where he has been deceptive, if you're reading through Genesis with us. Not in this case, but in other cases, he has been deceptive. And so here, now the tables have turned. He is now being deceived. Now it is being done to him. And that is why he trembles. He trembles because he realizes what I have been doing has now been done to me. And it's been done to me by my son and by the woman that I love. That's not good. So God's will can't be stopped. God's will is like a bowling ball being pushed off of a 10-foot building. It's going straight down. If you try to get in the way, if you try to stop it, if you try to change it or help it along, you're probably not going to enjoy the consequences. That's one of the lessons here, and it's something important that we see. None of these people are really trusting and having faith in God. So I said the consequences are bad if you are getting in God's way. And the consequences in this story are tragic. It's first-rate soap opera material. Esau becomes so angry he threatens to kill his brother. Jacob has to flee. And as a result, Rebekah never sees her favorite son again. She dies before he ever comes back. Isaac, the father, lives with the pain of knowing he's been betrayed by the love of his life and his son. And Jacob goes for 20 years, penniless, hardworking. And even on his own wedding night, there's a little switcheroo. He thinks he's marrying Rachel, but instead he marries Leah. And then later, in his elderly years, his own son lied to him. And we'll see next week that the birthright doesn't really come to pass as he expected. It's all tragic. And so the message here is, do not reject what God ordains, because the consequences can stretch across time. There will be things that will never be right again. And you may lose things that you will never be able to regain. And we see that in this story, and it's sobering. Remember, God doesn't need our help. He just needs our obedience and our cooperation. If you're feeling confused and frustrated, God tells you to have faith and patience. If you're feeling impulsive and needing to be deceptive and feeling like the ends justifies the mean, I want to tell you, you might have short-term gain, but you're going to have long-term sorrow. And that's what we see in this story. So my final word is allow God's plan to unfold. Tune your mind to God's will and have faith and trust. Ask him to use you in an appropriate way to bring things about. And I want to offer you this last piece of encouragement. If you've already messed things up in some situation in your life, ask God to work it out for you. You may have to wait years for him to work it out, but he will. He either will restore what you lost, or if he doesn't restore it, he'll create a new path for you and a new way, and he'll bring you comfort. So God's will really is like a bowling ball coming off of a 10-story building. It's going to land exactly where God desires. And so it is our goal to have faith and trust and patience, and to let God use us in an appropriate and righteous way. Have a great week.